I'll just start with a concrete question, which is how can we make significant strides in increasing diversity in industry? I'll start with that. I won't touch on the academic piece.
One piece of research that I didn't really get to share is some research on hiring. So the first step in increasing diversity is really getting diversity into your company. And so we did some research looking at hiring rates for women and men, majority and minority group members, and found that if you interview one woman in a pool, in a finalist pool, and 2 men, or 1 woman and 5 men, statistically that woman's never hired. And I think the idea is she's a token. You're like, do you want to hire John? He's really good at math. David is really good with numbers. Or do we want to bring in this woman? And they're like, do we want to hire a woman? We shouldn't hire her just because she's a woman, right? So they don't even consider her. But we did, in experiments, is increase the number of women in the pool. So it could be 2 out of 3, 2 out of 4, 2 out of 8, 2 out of 12. And no matter what, that increased the chance of hiring a woman. It was like 178 times greater. And so we looked at company hiring data over 2.5 years and looked at all the times where they had different groups of men and women, majority and minority members in a pool, and found the same thing. When there were 4 applicants for a position, the finalist slate, if there were 3 women and 1 man, a woman was hired 67% of the time, because you guys are math savvy, it should be 75%, but 67% of the time. 2 men and 2 women, it was 50% of the time. If there was 1 woman and 3 men, a woman was never hired in 2.5 years. It was 0. So I think that really shows just the power of this really small manipulation. It's like, don't make them a token. If this is actually a big effort, then you should consider more than 1 woman or minority.
Thank you. Myra?
Well, you've got to get commitment from the top that this is something that the company wants to do and that the company is willing to reward people who get with the program. And I always think to myself about how President Harry Truman, integrated the armed forces after World War II. Of course, he was the commander-in-chief, and he said, we will be integrated. He didn't do any focus groups. He didn't find out whether people wanted to be integrated or not. He knew they didn't want to be integrated. And eventually, when studies were done of how all of this worked out, people changed their biases once they worked with African Americans, once they fought with African Americans. So remember that bias works 2 ways. You can work on the bias and try to change people's biases so that they'll be willing to hire people, or you can just tell them, you may be biased, but we're hiring more of this kind of person, and you'll have to figure out how to deal with it. And I would say that at the very least, you should do both. Don't wait for the implicit bias to disappear.
Yes. Thank you.
So I'm also part of Project Include, projectinclude.org, which started off as casual coffee with several prominent women. We have over 150 years of tech experience. We decided to do a framework around 100 pages on all what it takes from the commitment from the investors to the CEO. And then now it's a nonprofit. And I'm like, how did this all happen in 8 or 9 months? But we're so committed to this. It's led by Ellen Powell. If those of you who don't know, Ellen, it's her birthday today, so I just wished her happy birthday. But she led very prominent lawsuit against Kleiner Perkins, a venture capital firm. Before that, she was the CEO of Reddit. There's also Frida Kaper, who's actually a Cal Bear alumni. And we've all decided that this is really important. How can we change? We think that having really uncomfortable discussions will actually lead to more. So within ourselves, we actually have uncomfortable discussions from all the women. Some of us have different life experiences. We're racially very different. So like, what does it mean for a Black woman in tech versus, let's say, me as a Latina? So we have these uncomfortable situations with each other, and we've come to a consensus. We have a Medium post that we wrote about how it actually promoted the diversity of thought. Even thought people would look at us and they're like, oh, they're all women. They're probably all agreeing. We don't. We also think that unconscious bias is a good first step, but to only focus on the unconscious or implicit means that you're lacking accountability on the biased behaviors that exist in tech. So when those biased behaviors become the norm and they're no longer implicit or unconscious, there should be an accountability being held. So we promote that. And lastly and third, we promote intersectionality, which means that we all have different identities, that we don't want to just be the only women in the room, that we're a mother in the room, that we're a founder, that we're an immigrant. And so we promote other conversations, not just around gender. So I do think that there's other groups, Women in Technology, there's other groups that are doing this. In ourselves is to actually have uncomfortable situations. I am one of maybe, I think, 8 female CEOs in my investors' portfolio, lead investors. There's about 160 men. Instead of me pointing out that I am the only blah, 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 I point out that I wanted to create a woman at these VC firms. And so now I'm creating a solidarity between all the female founders. So to promote change is to actually ask for that change. And I do believe in allies as well.
Yeah, I'll just, I strongly agree with Myra that having leaders at the top that believe in diversity, not just lip service, but really believe in it and hold the whole company accountable for achieving it, I think makes a big difference. I think Intel is a good example of that. They've really been a leader in that way. But I also think bottom up, demanding, you know, that your company or your group be more aware of their lack of diversity is helpful as well. Okay, I'm going to turn to the questions that we have. This one's a good one, and I think we'll probably only have time for 2, but let me start with this one. If there were one message you wish you could convey to the well-meaning or would-be male allies, what would it be? Because we need them. What's that?
We love you.
Okay.
I would say that as well. I wrote a paper earlier this year that came out in Academy Management Journal, which is a popular business journal, and Harvard Business Review, that showed that when women and minorities advocated for diversity, it actually caused a negative impact on their career. When white men did, it didn't have that impact. So if you believe that diversity increases the bottom line, which you heard, like there's no argument, it does, then if you're a man, I don't think it's just like a good thing to do. I feel like it's an imperative. It's a business imperative if you want your company to succeed, that white men need to step up and advocate for women and minorities.
I think allies come in different form. I've had them throughout my whole life. They've never called themselves an ally. They just felt that that's just. And this is something that they think about. I think about also my investors, right? Like they didn't look at me and then say, we want to be your ally. They looked at the fact that they felt that this was a worthy investment. And as we were having conversations, they understood that. But that being said, it's also maybe they weren't that my ally at that moment, but the moment they invested in me, they had to become allies to other female entrepreneurs. So they were put in that spot and they were open to it. So I think asking, when someone is put in the spot of being an ally, asking them if they're okay with that, if they want to keep supporting that. And most of the time said yes. Like I do think I just didn't know how to get into the conversation.
So in my experience, I think most of the guys want to do the right thing. They don't understand the injustice or the lack of diversity, and so raising awareness tends to help. And I also find that it helps to point out if they're fathers of girls or grandfathers of girls, that these girls are facing a very difficult environment if they decide they want to go into tech. And that tends to resonate with a lot of the guys that I talk to, because it doesn't affect them, but thinking about it affecting their children and grandchildren can actually have a big impact.
Can I make one other point? I want us to think about this fight as going on for as long as it in fact has been going on. How many of you have ever heard of Elizabeth Cady Stanton? Okay, you should all hear of her, and you should all go look up her work. She was the author in 1848 of the women's rights document, the most important women's rights document. She said in 1848, we must have male allies. And so, you know, we're not inventing the wheel here today. We're standing on the shoulders of men and women who have been fighting this fight for almost 200 years.
Okay, so I've been told I need to cut it off. I'm going to read one comment. I won't ask for a question, but there were 2 questions on negotiating, so I just wanted to highlight the comment was that research is showing that it's not that women are poor negotiators, but more that the expectations of women negotiating are different than of men, which is an interesting point. And the question, which unfortunately we don't have time to get to, but maybe you can tap our panelists at the break, is what negotiating tactics have been effective for women? And I think recognizing that the expectations might be different, it could be part of the answer to that question. So anyway, I apologize we don't have more time, but thank you very much for all your questions, and thanks to my panelists.